Hare Krishna. As with most important subjects, if not all, Srila Prabhupada gave many instructions on them. In terms of GBC, he said many things at different times, that a GBC would see that in all of his temples that his books are being thoroughly read and discussed and understood and applied in practical life, and not just that books are being distributed. And that GBC members, they must become very much responsible and do the work that Srila Prabhupada was doing. And also, he set the bar high because he would say to the same standard that he was doing. So he wanted that his leaders would especially become absorbed in the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and that become yourselves completely convinced and free from all doubt. Now that's a most important instruction, because obviously, you know, in order to be able to convince other people of something, and what devotees are trying to do is convince people of Krishna consciousness and that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it certainly helps if you're convinced of that yourself. He also went on to say things like the future hope and solid standing of the mission that he'd created is all dependent on the proper management of the governing body. And that's what GBC stands for, the Governing Body Commission. And that now that we're increasing in volume and the area of activity of ISKCON is expanding, that under those circumstances, if the management isn't properly situated and doesn't go on nicely, then the prestige and good name, etc., could become compromised. At the same time, we have balancing statements in relation to the role of the GBC from Srila Prabhupada. And he made the point that, you know, GBC does not mean to control a center or to control a temple, but it means that the GBC just must see that all activities at the center or at the temple, that they're going on nicely. But that the president and the treasurer and the secretary, etc., that they're responsible for the direct management of a center. So the GBC should see that things are going on nicely, but not that they try to exert absolute authority over a center. At the same time, the GBC men cannot impose anything on the center without consulting all the GBC members. So that caveat is there that if necessary, the GBC body, after hearing a situation, if it needs some intervention, that option is there. And Prabhupada would say things like, now you're all my elder disciples, you know, you're sannyasis, etc., you're advanced in Krishna consciousness, so questions should not arise again and again. And specifically, Srila Prabhupada was talking that they would come to himself again and again. He would say that these things are not new now to you, and why are you continually asking questions? But if the need is there, that the GBC can be consulted on these things, and that the GBC authority should be accepted in all circumstances, and not that there should be fighting, because this fighting spirit will ultimately destroy things. And that quote in particular seems to indicate that whatever about right and wrong, and particularly our interpretation of what's right and what's wrong, is not necessarily the most important thing. Rather, accepting authority, because authority has to lie somewhere, and accepting that authority, we should honor that principle established by Srila Prabhupada. Otherwise, ultimately chaos would ensue. And then there's one wonderful quote, famous quote and wonderful quote from Srila Prabhupada, where he talks about material nature means dissension and disagreement, especially in Kali Yuga. But in our Krishna consciousness movement, its success will depend on agreement, even though there are varieties of engagements and there's varieties of diversity. So in the material world, he said, there are varieties, but there's no agreement. Whereas in the spiritual world, there is also variety, but there is agreement. And that this is the core difference between the material and spiritual worlds. So, very important instruction from Srila Prabhupada with regards to maintaining unity in our movement despite our enormous diversity. So, there's some of the duties that were given by Srila Prabhupada, but in a nutshell, you could say that the GBC is an overseer, GBC is a standard bearer, is a policy maker, and is an encourager of devotees in their service and their practice of Krishna consciousness. And ultimately, as Srila Prabhupada said, that the GBC body is the ultimate managing authority for his movement. Hare Krishna, thank you very much.